Well, welcome everybody to our last January immigration um, education seminar. We are really lucky today to have two fantastic speakers. We're going to hear about the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Program is referred to as DACA. We have Dr. Luis Torres. He's a longtime educator and administrator. He taught in higher education since 1972, first as a graduate student and then as an English professor. He later became the professor and chair of the Department of Chicano Studies at MSU in Denver, and he became the deputy provost for academic and student affairs. Dr. Torres retired in 2017, and he is a wealth of information. He's a member of the weekly issue El Seminario editorial and advisory board. So I think we're really interested in hearing what he has to say. Dr. Torres is going to talk in general about the DACA program, and after he speaks, we're going to hear from Gregor Meter, who is hold on. He moved to the United States from Germany in 2000, earning his BA in English and his master's in applied linguistics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. For the last 20 years, he's been working with refugees, first and second generation immigrants, and undocumented adult learners, assisting with language development, college success, and navigating community resources. He's taught English language courses and trains tutors and staff in providing appropriate and effective English language and writing skills development, as well as academic support. Mr. Meter is currently the Director of Immigrant Services Program at Metropolitan State University of Denver and works closely with undocumented and immigrant students at MSU, developing workshops, events, and resources that support prospective and currently enrolled college learners. So we have a really broad spectrum here tonight, and we'll be able to see how the events of the last 2 weeks are affecting people that the vast majority of the United States population thinks should be protected. So Dr. Torres, would you like to start?
Yes, and thank you, Ms. Ebersberger, and others for inviting me and inviting my colleague, Gregor Meiter, and the publisher of El Seminario, Chris Fresquez, for this event. It's a pleasure to be here, and this is an extremely significant subject, topic, issue, call it what we will. So I'm going to make some general comments about immigration and some about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and then Mr. Meter will continue with that, including about education. And in fact, DACA, of course, has been extremely helpful for the education of the immigrant students. I will say this point in a bit when I talk further detail, but we should remember that the undocumented immigrant students who were and are covered by DACA arrived here at an average age of 7 years old, right? 7 years old. That has been a touchstone for me and for other people in trying to assist students who have been covered by DACA. And I say have been or had been because, as I will talk a little bit further, that program, that executive order by President Obama was unfortunately suspended for new applicants as of 2021, so it's been 3.5 years. But to come back to the broader statements, immigration is constantly changing. As people begin to study and research immigration, it has a long history, and I think the one the one main comment I would make about it is it just changes all the time, and it is quite complex. There are current changes within the last week, right? Within the last and it's covered by a variety of policies and laws and changes and so on. So that's the first thing I would like to emphasize. And the situation with DACA is an example of that. There are a couple of amendments to the U.S. Constitution that we want to highlight. Everybody knows about these, but I think it's important to point out how fundamental they are to immigration, right? The first one is the 14th Amendment, and you'll have to excuse me. I am going to try to share screen here. And if I can, then we can take a look at these. We can take a look at these amendments. Are you able to see now up on the screen at the very top? It says 14th Amendment, and then in light blue, Equal Protection Clause.
Yes, we can.
I'll be darned, it worked. I am not very adept at technology, but it worked. So we have to remember with the Equal Protection Clause, here's a question. Are immigrants covered? Are they protected by the U.S. Constitution? That is such a simple and basic question. But the answer is absolutely. They are absolutely covered by the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. I have it up on the screen. I hope you can see it. I'll enlarge the screen. I will enlarge this just a little bit to make sure. So the 14th Amendment has a couple of sections, right? And actually, it has four sections. This is what the first section says. And again, everybody is familiar with it, but I want to point out something. I'm just going to read from here. Equal Protection Clause, Section 1, the first section of the 14th Amendment. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. And, we'd say, fine, great, obviously. But then look at this. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Therefore, because the key word there, the key word for me has always been person, right? Notice that the first section, the first clause says, refers to citizens. This one says person, and it says person twice. And I would, I think we should celebrate that first section of the 14th Amendment. It's what makes the U.S. what it is. It is absolutely fundamental to our democracy, to our way of life. And look at what it says. And no state nor shall any state deprive any person of what? Life, liberty, or property without due process. And then, of course, the Equal Protection Clause, right? So due process and equal protection, which means that immigrants, anybody who enters the U.S., sets foot on the U.S. soil, is therefore protected, which is what we want. Well, that's what I want. It's what we want, right? And that is what separates us, frankly, from a lot of other countries. And I know immigrants. I should say my father was an immigrant, undocumented immigrant. So I grew up with the threat that my father would be deported, but leave that aside for now. I know immigrants. I've worked with them, and a lot of people think that immigrants come here for a better life, meaning income, a job, etc. They come here to be protected by that they might not be able to refer to the 14th Amendment, first and second section. But so anyway, we can come back to that maybe. And then look at the citizenship clause, all because this is so significant these days, right? All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Well, that is very, very much under, I'll just use the term, under attack now from the Trump administration, because he and they are saying that the birthright clause, birthright citizenship clause, should be done away with. And for example, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, of course they are subject to the jurisdiction thereof. They're subject to the jurisdiction of laws. They're subject to the jurisdiction of paying taxes, for example, and so on. So, and then one other I thought we should refer to, because our church is going to be sanctuaries in the near future, sanctuaries for protecting immigrants, and sanctuaries, you know, the churches the churches protect as a sanctuary other kinds of people, right? Not just immigrants, people who are having a difficult time, people who need some kind of refuge, which is a synonym for sanctuary. Anyway, it says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. While prohibiting the free exercise thereof includes, of course, providing sanctuary to frankly anyone who enters a church. And just by the way, I'm an old English professor. The word sanctuary, I just highlighted this, is from the Latin sanctuarium, meaning holy. And in the Catholic Church, the sanctuary is a small space in the front of the church where, for example, the altar and the Eucharist and the liturgy are all intertwined. The reason we raise this point is because DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, protects children. It protects young people because they were brought here. This is according to the Census Bureau. They were brought here at an average age of 7 years old. In longer presentations, you know, I talk about, well, what does that mean? 7 years old. A child, and I got this directly from a judge, from a very significant judge, no child, and it's written in American jurisprudence, no child under the age of 10 can commit any crime. In fact, judges and lawyers have gotten upset with me when I ask them that question. They think, you know, they think I'm kind of losing it. What would make you ask a question like that? They ask, no child, I'll say it again, no child under the age of 10 can commit any crime. I have grandchildren. I've had children and grandchildren. And I mean, a grandchild age 7, 8, 9, you know, they do not understand the law. All of that is very, very significant because the DACA, of course, to protect those young people. That's why President Obama issued it as an executive order in 2012. And unfortunately, it has been, as I said earlier, it has been discontinued for new applicants, tens of thousands of potential new applicants. They can no longer even apply for deferred action for child arrival since July, I think it was July 16th of 2021, 3.5 years, as I mentioned. Those who had it then can still carry it forward. They have to reapply every 2 years, and then they go through a process, but most of them have been processed and approved. So I'll mention a couple more points about DACA, and then I'll turn it to Mr. Mader, and then we will continue with other points. I'm going to get off of the sharing here. Stop share. So several of us here, and this might be something that that might be unusual to hear, but several of us have been trying for a few years, 4 or 5 years, to try to create a Denver DACA and a Colorado DACA. First thing people say when they hear that is, well, you can't do that because immigration is a federal matter and you can't override, federal matters in through a state policy. Well, that's not exactly the case. So we could create a Denver DACA to protect young people who live here in Denver. We could possibly create a Colorado DACA to protect young people who live throughout the rest of Colorado. And we think we know that would greatly assist in the graduation rates, for example, in high school. I should say I taught for a long time, as Ms. Ebersberger mentioned. I started in 1972 teaching in higher ed. You can count, but it's 52 years. I've known, like I mentioned earlier, I've known many undocumented immigrant students, and other undocumented. And I've taught in Denver Public Schools through the concurrent enrollment courses. We teach a class from MSU Denver in Denver high schools, and they receive college credit. And I know through many ways that this would assist the students in Denver Public Schools and other schools to graduate, to go on to higher education. Deferred action, think of what it means, deferred action for childhood arrivals. What is deferred? The deferred is the sending them back to the deportation. Deportation is deferred. It is set aside. That's what deferred means. Take something, you set it aside, maybe come back to it later. And so that is the deferred action. And the young people would also be able to receive work authorization permits. They could have work authorization permits in Denver, and if we extend it to Colorado, we could have work authorization permits in the rest of Colorado. And that is very significant to these students. I had some of these students who would have to leave, unfortunately. Oh, if I was teaching a class from 2 to 3:15, for example, they might have to leave at 2:45 to go out and work if they were lucky enough to have a job. That is very significant to them. So we've written several documents, which I would love to share with you. Letters, for example, to the mayor and to the governor, to the mayor to issue, and to the previous mayor, Mayor Hancock, to consider the creation of a Denver DACA, and to the governor to consider the creation of a Colorado DACA. Maybe that is something that we can work on together, remembering that it is for young people who committed no crime, who are not here illegally, not here, despite what the political machinations might say. They have not committed any crime. They did not come here illegally. What were they supposed to do? Tell their parents, no, I'm not going to go with you, right? So for many reasons, we really are continuing to work along these lines. So, Mr. Mader, if you can share with us some of your experiences working with young people, working with students, and in other ways, the extensive work that you have on a day-to-day basis with immigration, that would be very helpful. So I will
Oh, how
raise other points in a
nice.
bit, but for Mr. Mader.
Could I interrupt for just a second? Could you tell us a little
Yeah.
bit? Could everybody please mute?
Okay. Wonderful. Okay. Wow. So how much, how much was
Could-
his assessment and all that?
Could you please mute?
Oh, how nice.
I think we can go ahead and discuss Ms. Ebersberger.
Okay,
I'm working on it, Kathy, or
okay, thanks. Um, I was just wondering, like, you mentioned that, the
Wow.
average age of people, um, covered by DACA came here by the time they were, or when they were 7. But is there a limit for how old they could be? How old they could be when they came here in order to apply for DACA?
Yes, there are limits. Gregor, you might assist with this. Yes, there are limits because it is childhood arrivals. Now they might, and there were stipulations as to when they would have arrived, and then when they could have applied, depending on depending on their arrival. If they got into Colorado, for example, when they were 25, 30, they might not have been applicable, but when they arrived at, again, say age 7 or 8 or 9 or 10, etc. As long as they applied, as long as they arrived at a certain point and then they applied at a certain point, there were stipulations. Gregor, can you assist us with that?
Yeah, 100%. And Dr. Torres, you had it exactly right. So one of the things, of course, with DACA is that folks are aging out, right? Precisely because, as Dr. Torres was saying, there's a very specific timeline that's written into the eligibility criteria for deferred action. So specifically, folks must have been under the, and I pulled it up. Don't think that I have all the very specific dates memorized, simply because they actually change. They're sort of on a running basis, right? So folks must have been under the age of 31 as of June in 2012. They must have come before the age of 16 to the United States, must have been here continuously since 2007, right? And so that criteria, those criteria alone mean that folks are aging out. Of course, there's also requirements around being enrolled in school, graduated or obtained a certificate of completion from a high school, absolutely whistle clean record. So not just no convictions, but no arrests, right? No interaction with law enforcement. And there's other criteria. I'm not going to go into those, but those are probably the most important ones. But again, the fact that there is an age requirement tied to a specific date and an arrival requirement means that actually at MSU Denver, we see fewer students with DACA and proportionally more students who unfortunately have no protections under DACA, and we expect that to continue, especially since new applications haven't been permitted for years.
So what happens to them if once they turn 31? They just have no protection and they get deported?
Basically, they're subject to deportation, yes. And of course, what we're seeing now are these concerted efforts to go after really any folks that are without status in the United States. Previous administrations had generally focused on folks with criminal records or in very specific legal situations. But yeah, I mean, the additional risk, of course, for folks who have applied for DACA is their records are out there, right? USCIS, Customs Immigration Services, that handles large parts of the immigration system in the U.S. They have their information, and that of course adds to the urgency and the risk around DACA recipients, because they have stuck their necks out, hoping that they would have a stable future and could build a career and could build a safe and productive life for themselves and their families. So that does add to the urgency of the moment for sure.
Yeah, that's really
that-
important because I was under the impression that they could file this and it was, continuous if they kept reapplying, but it never occurred to me that just by getting older, they're losing that protection. That's horrific.
And that's an interesting point for the young people who cannot apply now because the federal judge in the Fifth Circuit Court from Texas again stopped the applications, which means that by the time they turn 18, let's say if they were brought here when they're 11, 10,
Wow.
11, 12, whatever, by the time they turn 18, when they do turn 18, it's as if they automatically, just by transferring from 17 years and 364 days to, to 18, they commit a crime, and then they are considered illegal. In what other area of life that, does that occur? I would also add, in addition to the stipulations that Mr. Mader said, service in the military can also be a significant factor for when they were able to apply for DACA. In other words, service in the military, even without citizenship, right? I mean, undocumented immigrants who would join the military, that would be a benefit to them. Not that they would sign up for the military because it would be a benefit for them, but it was an additional positive, right, for their consideration for receiving DACA.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Meter.
No, not at all. And I'm gonna try to get through some key points here pretty efficiently, just in case folks have questions or additional comments or want to share their expertise as well here. But I'll talk briefly about the Immigrant Services Program, because we're a somewhat unique program, even nationwide to some extent. The kinds of things that we have been doing for students for many years, how we are pivoting to what's been happening really since the inauguration, and what we hope to do and what we are currently doing. But if you'll allow me for 2 minutes, I'm gonna go a little personal. Very occasionally I share this story because I think it actually illustrates how the U.S. immigration system works, or more specifically, how it doesn't work. So I came to the U.S. when I was 20, and as most undocumented folks, I overstayed a tourist visa. So of course the media oftentimes, talks about southern border. More than 60% of folks without status in the U.S. overstay tourist visas. So those are not individuals who simply cross the border. They arrive on a plane, as I did. They have a couple weeks. I think I had 3 months. I overstayed it. I started working under the table pretty much week one. I followed a youthful love, as one does when one is 20 years old. And at some point I got married to a U.S. citizen. And I showed up. This was just pre 9/11, when the U.S. immigration system was no less unfair than it is today, but perhaps more chaotic. And I showed up at what back then was the Immigration Naturalization Services, again before Homeland Security was created and everything was revamped. And I showed up and I said, well, I got married. So where are my papers now? I hear I can become a permanent resident. And so they looked me up and down, and I was 20. I probably looked more like I was 14 or 15. And they said, well, Mr. Meter, so you're supposed to, do this from your home country, right? You've committed an immigration violation because you overstayed a tourist visa. Really, you should have started this process through the U.S. Embassy in your home country. It's and again, you really shouldn't even be here. But you know what we're gonna do? And they just rubber stamped me through, and they just processed my forms just fine, because the way the U.S. immigration system works is that the person behind the counter, when they see a presumably nice English-speaking white little guy show up, their biases and their prejudices and their assumptions about who's before them all come into play. These immigration officers and immigration agents can make life and death decisions. They do it right then and there at the desk. They do it right at the counter. They either accept documents or they hand it right back to you. And they say, well, thanks for trying, and you have 60 days or whatever it may be to leave the country, or actually we're going to put you in detention right now. And I'm saying, I'm kind of recounting this story to really show that, the kinds of prejudices that individuals, officers have, they're baked into the system. It's not a mistake. It is meant to give so much power, the immigration system in the US, so much power to the individual agents that are processing cases, right? And the end result is that, again, if somebody showed up with exactly my situation from El Salvador, from Honduras, from Mexico, from Ghana, from Afghanistan, from Ethiopia, it's doubtful they would have gotten that sort of friendly treatment. I actually remember at one point an immigration agent, this was back in Wisconsin, was like, oh, I had a grandfather from Germany, great, family came from Germany way back then. Of course, they had no connection to Germany whatsoever at that point anymore. But those are the kinds of things that impact decisions, and that's how this system works. And that part hasn't changed very much because there's just no interest in taking away that power that agents have. And I think we see that even today, right? When ICE decides, oh, we're either going to move into a school, we're either going to go to meatpacking plants in Greeley, we're going to go into places, as we will address here in a minute, where previously there hasn't been any enforcement, right? That's all driven by however individuals at the agency seem to feel that morning. However, all the way down from the presidency, folks feel immigration enforcement should happen, right? And that's all driven by the kinds of preferences and prejudices that folks have already. And thank you for letting me talk about that for a couple of minutes, but I think it's important to remember that's the immigration system.
Gregor, if I can make a point here, and thank you for all of that. That's very, very helpful. You indicated that the large percentage of undocumented immigrants who arrive through airports and then overstay their visas and they become undocumented immigrants. Now, everyone who's listening, think of when the last time was that you saw something in the media about Denver International Airport as a hotspot for undocumented immigration. It is always 100% always the southern border with the wall, right? So this is really remarkable. The exact numbers are a little difficult to gather. You have to try to search for immigration percentages through airports, 2021, 2022, 2023, etc. Gregor, you indicated what was the percentage?
62% according to the immigration, I think the Legal Resource Center, ILRC. It's a big clearing house.
Right. However, everyone, again, why is it that this kind of large immigration, undocumented immigration percentage is never discussed? Would anybody ever think of putting a wall around Denver International Airport? No, of course not. That imagery, a lot of the discussion about immigration is directed through the imagery that we get from the southern border. So I think that is extremely important. And I should say, there's discussion, for example, about Elon Musk. Elon Musk, who is now in the administration, that there's question, and I've read what he has said, whether he overstayed his visa, whether he was actually on an education visa. There are a lot of different types of visas, or a, the kind of visa, I think it's H-1A that allows for people with technology skills, for example, to enter the country and stay for a limited period of time, and then they have to leave, possibly come back, etc. Or they become legally as undocumented as people crossing the border. I'm sorry, Gregor, I interrupted, but continue on your next point.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm going to pick up a question that showed up in the chat because it's actually kind of a good segue. And the first question from I believe Rita is, do we have any statistics on how many DACA recipients naturalize, right? And really the naturalization, we should understand, is sort of the final endpoint. I've been a permanent resident for decades in the US, mostly because Germany doesn't allow dual citizenship. That's recently changed. But that pathway, those pathways, they exist, but they're incredibly limited. Those pathways could come through, as in my case, through sponsorship of an immediate family member or a spouse. Now, there's tons of restrictions. And also the processing times depend, and this is oftentimes hard to believe for most folks, they depend on country of origin. So if somebody is being sponsored by a spouse, by an immediate family member, again, there's marital and age requirements around that. But if somebody is being sponsored by a sibling, by a spouse, potentially by a parent, I don't think actually parents have that avenue. The problem with that is those processing times, they can take decades. I remember checking a couple of years back, when processing times were about 6-7 years for some European countries. For folks from Mexico, they were over 20 years. They were just starting to process individuals' sibling-based sponsorship from the late 90s. Britney Spears was just starting to become a thing. When there were folks who had submitted their applications during the late 90s were just starting to have their cases reviewed. And in the meantime, folks cannot stay and work in the United States, right, if they're going through this family sponsorship process. Now, there's other processes, folks who are victims of certain types of crimes, right, victims of human trafficking and so on. But the reason why I'm picking that up as a question is, one of the things at MSU Denver that we do, so we have about 450 students who either have DACA, who have no DACA, or temporary protected status, which is a DACA-like program for folks from specific countries. Those folks need access to qualified legal assistance, to qualified legal help. So since 2017, at the Immigrant Services Program, we have brought pro bono attorneys to campus who can advise students. We recognize that's not enough, so we're right now working with a donor who's interested in potentially funding a legal resource program, something that exists in a similar form at Colorado State University in Fort Collins, for example, where we can have an attorney actually provide direct assistance to individuals. That's one of the resources we're building out at the MSU Denver campus. We are the largest campus for undocumented students to attend, both because of our location, but we're also a very affordable school, and we're a Hispanic serving institution, which you know, is not just a numbers game, right? A certain percentage of your student population has to identify as Latino, Latina, Latinx. But it also means, you know, we have an obligation to provide services that are relevant for Hispanic students. And so in addition to meeting one-on-one with students, me and my two colleagues, the 3 full-time staff, that's our bread and butter. That's what we do. We meet with students, we meet with community members who either are thinking about college, who maybe have a degree from abroad, maybe they're wondering about, what does financial aid look like with my status? Can I get in-state tuition? As some of you might know, in-state, out-of-state tuition is a big difference, not just in how much you pay, but also the access to financial aid you get. The vast majority of the 600 students who are served by Immigrant Services either have no status or have DACA or have TPS. Over 90% of the students we work with are the first in their family to ever attend college, are classified as low-income students. And while over 70% of the students we work with are Spanish speakers. So that means a lot of the resources that we provide to students, that we focus on, really focus on the most vulnerable students, which are students without a stable immigration status. You may be wondering, well, if you know who's undocumented, who has DACA, isn't that fairly dangerous? That's a big conversation. It's happening at a lot of universities around data protection. We kind of have been able to go around that issue by simply creating categories that are much larger than just saying this is an undocumented student who could be deported, right? So that's why I'm saying we don't really know how many folks have temporary protections under DACA or TPS, that DACA-like program, or who have absolutely no status. Certainly anecdotally, we see students more and more who don't have any status at all. When it used to be really more DACA students. But it's important to remember, you know, we use the term DACA, but but more and more, as Dr. Torres was indicating, we're really dealing with folks who don't have any stable status. And of course, we don't really think DACA will survive much longer. It's been under attack in the courts for so long.
I'll just make a couple of comments and then Ms. Eppersberger and others, we can open it up for more questions, right? You mentioned, Gregor, TPS, that means temporary protected status. And it is temporary, but there is some protection. And I think one of the points that we can draw from what Mr. Mader has been saying, there are a lot of efforts to help undocumented students and undocumented other individuals. We are educators, right? I am an educator. It's the only thing I've ever been able to do in my life. So it's a good thing I was able to do it for a long time. I'm an educator. I want to educate, the mind and the character. And that's why I was at MSU Denver for a long time. I was an administrator in addition to being a professor. We want to educate students, and that's it. I mean, that's what we are there for. A couple more comments about the possibility of a Colorado DACA. And remembering that DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, was an executive order from President Obama. There have been many executive orders. President Trump, when he came in as president last week, he signed. In fact, he said, I am going to sign 100 executive orders on my first day. I believe he signed 26 and then continued. Executive orders are very powerful. We here in Colorado and in Denver, we had executive orders from the mayor and from the governor up during the pandemic about whether we should use masks, get vaccines, and so on. Executive orders are very powerful, and we believe that the mayor and the governor could establish Denver DACAs and Colorado DACAs through executive orders. And there have been, I'm not going to call them up, but I'm looking over here. There have been several executive orders that the former mayors and the current mayor and former governors have signed to assist immigrants. You might hear in the news, might read in the newspaper, the controversy that is being manufactured, I would say, about what the mayor has said and has not said. Those executive orders that others have signed and that he is working along, he is working on behalf of those executive orders and some policies that the city council and the governor have issued. So they are very, very helpful. In fact, President Trump in December said that I'm looking at my notes, that he wants to assist the DACA young people. I mean, that's his statement. He was asked in, I think it was an NBC, might not have been NBC, but I think it was an NBC interview about DACA, because he had said that before, and he confirmed that yes, he wants to do something to assist the young people. And he pointed out that some of them have excellent jobs and that they've created businesses and so on. And I'll end with this, approximately 54% of the US population they want to support DACA recipients, right? 54%. And both Republican and Democrat and whatever other their other affiliation. A majority of Republicans, in fact, are in favor of assisting DACA recipients. If there's one thing I could ask of JEDI and League of Women Voters, it's at least consider trying to support to the mayor and to the governor the establishment of a Colorado DACA and a Denver DACA to support these students. We think it would work. We've done a lot of research on it, so we're quite confident. Gregor, how about if we open it up for other questions, comments?
Perfect. One other plug as well, in addition to Dr. Torres' efforts and initiative regarding a state DACA program. You all are probably well aware of the Colorado Rapid Response Network. If you're not, CORRN, they're easy to find. Near as I know, they're only active on Facebook, but I'm mostly off social media. They have a very effective legal observer and confirmation system. They're constantly checking out whether reports of ICE and enforcement activity is happening. It may be worthwhile for those of you who what can we do and potentially any upcoming raids, at the very least, check out CORN, CORRN, for those who are fortunate enough to support Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition. They can use every penny right now. They may well have suggestions for you all to volunteer. A lot of folks want to volunteer, but it's really important to do that in an effective way, right? So be it through Legal Observer, Showing Up for Racial Justice is a really great program that actually utilizes the societal privileges that us white folks have in order to protect protesters and protect action. So there are fantastic ways to get involved. I do see a hand up from Shauna.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm Shauna. I work with Kathy on the JEDI committee. I'm curious what your students are feeling right now. What is your general consensus on, how they're feeling about everything? Are you seeing them coming to class regularly? Are you seeing a drop off in attendance? Just what's the general vibe of your undocumented and documented DACA students?
I can certainly start to answer, Dr. Torres. You have quite a bit of student contact as well. I will say that students have been undocumented students with or without DACA have been so resilient. The ones, and this is going to sound horrible, but the ones who are still in college are the ones who've persisted for decades. It's honestly the ones, who dropped out, who never came to college. The college attendance rate for folks who are not U.S. citizens is so much lower in Colorado. And so, students are breaking down in my office. We're walking to the counseling center together. We're looking for emergency funding because, they're getting paid under the table and they're quote unquote, employer is like, why should I pay you? You're going to be deported tomorrow anyways. They're dealing with the stressors they've been dealing with, and really this election is sort of the final straw, if you will, right? It's not that the election suddenly upended their lives. Their lives have been upended from the beginning. And it's just the next awful development. That's my response, which is a bit different than saying, oh, the election did this horrible thing, which of course it did, and it created this extreme level of fear and anxiety and lack of safety. But students and families have been living those lives, and conversely, what they need hasn't changed that much, which is access to legal support, which is legislative fixes, an avenue to pursue a stable immigration status, which is largely non-existent. So all that is to say, it's less that the election has created this awful situation. They've been in an awful and unsafe situation for so long, and this has just brought it to the fore.
I'll just mention very briefly, and I alluded to it earlier. I've taught a few concurrent enrollment classes in some of the local high schools, Denver public schools and elsewhere. And it is absolutely heartbreaking to me when a student would come up to me, and I would try to encourage a student to apply to a college or university, and almost in tears, they would say, why should I even apply when I know that if I'm driving to a college or a university here, I might get stopped by the police and I'd have to face deportation. And I mean, it has been very, very difficult, I think, for a lot of these students. I mentioned earlier that the closer that they get to age 18, they realize they're in a completely different world than their classmates who are US citizens or who are documented. When we, I know, Ms. Hendricks, you have your hand up, but when at MSU Denver back in 2012, we passed the in-state tuition act by the board of MSU Denver to charge in-state tuition plus a slight capital fee. And students the next few years, they would come to me. This is just a little piece of paper, but they would come to me with their student ID, and they'd say, "Look, sir," they were thinking, "Mira, señor," right? Señor is a word of respect. So they'd say, "Look, sir, this is my identification," and I'd say, "Well, all right." And then they'd say, "No, you don't understand. I'm documented." So it was that significant to them that they would have that form of documentation, which was really transformative, I think, for a lot of students. And they had an excellent attendance rate at the university and grade level. The grades were exactly the university average and very, very good retention. Ms. Hendricks, I know you have your hand up.
Thanks, Dr. Torres. Has a Colorado DACA bill been drafted and run?
No. We have run into one difficulty after another. We've been at this. I have been at this personally. I have letters and so on dating back to 2019, 2018 even. And the political operatives that, I don't mean that negatively, the political, people in political offices keep coming back to a variety of reasons why they are apprehensive, they want to wait, etc. We have all of the foundational documentation, I think, for such a bill, but no, it has not been advanced by any group, unfortunately. Yes, I feel the same. We should do that, right? Yeah. I hope that answers your question. I wish it was a different answer, but that's it. Ms. Ebersberger, you have your hand up?
Oh, yeah, and I apologize, I got kicked off, so I'm back, and I hope I hope I'm not repeating somebody else's question that you've already answered. Number one, about the DACA bills that you're proposing, if you can send me the letters that you have, I'll take a look at it and figure out how we can put something on our website, and see what we can do.
Very
We'll
good.
we'll have to see. I think the thing that concerns me is even if they had a Denver DACA, it's not going to keep them away from, it's not going to prevent them from being deported now under this climate. It might have before, but I'm really concerned about how much protection it would really be able to give. But we should look at it and see if there's something we can do. I think that's really important.
Good. Thank you. I will do that.
And then the other question I have is, we're in a situation now where they've taken away the sensitive places, so they can arrest people in schools and churches and hospitals. And MSU has a really, I think it's pretty well known that you have a very robust support system for immigrant children, both protected and not protected. What has been, I mean, I would think that the kids are afraid to come to school. Is there anything you could do to protect them? Because like, if you look at the high schools and the elementary schools, they can lock the doors, but in a college campus, it's so different. Is there any protection for them at MSU?
Gregor?
Yeah, I can answer that. This is a conversation that's happening at universities and colleges across the US. Some are sticking their head into the ground, into the sand for sure, and are trying to cut back programs, rename programs, reassign staff. That is absolutely happening as well. Not gonna name any names here. But so the quick answer is, now that churches, hospitals, schools, and I'm missing one. Churches, hospitals, schools.
I think that's it.
Yeah, that may be it. Now that those places have essentially lost their protection under the memo or the guidance, right? It is true that we could absolutely see ICE enforcement on campus. There are some protective measures, right? So there's a distinction between a public place like a parking lot, our Tivoli Student Union, which has shops in it, which is accessible, explicitly accessible to the public, and a classroom or offices where folks cannot just walk in. They may need to either swipe a card to enter it, or get past the front desk. So it's not as if folks can just come and ask for information, ask for individuals. So there does need to be a warrant in place, right? A very specific type of warrant signed by a very specific type of judge, with that's accurate. The guidance that we generally have at universities and colleges is you need to talk with our attorney, right? With our legal counsel. There's usually just a couple people at every university, but they act as legal counsel, and they are the ones that ought to be evaluating any warrant, right? So if somebody comes and of course pulls somebody out of a classroom, guns drawn, worst case scenario, 10 people show up, it's next to impossible to ask of somebody to throw themselves into that situation, right, safely. But ultimately, no, folks cannot just have access to the information. We have very strong federal protection. The Family Education Rights Protection Act is a very strong piece of legislation. That means nobody can share just about any information about a student. And we're doing our best on our campus to educate folks about what to do if ICE comes to campus. We're fortunate that we have a very supportive legal counsel. The Auraria Police Department does not cooperate with ICE. Of course, they cannot stop ICE either from enforcing, and in very specific situations like an active pursuit, right? They are under some obligations to assist. But ultimately, there are some guardrails, right, around information and around access to spaces. We really hope that those guardrails don't get tested. That may well happen. To date, we have not had any enforcement in Colorado on any university or college campus, near as I know, not K through 12 either. But I don't know, Dr. Torres, if you have things to add there.
Yes, it so happens that within the last day or two, the mayor of Denver has been summoned to Washington, D.C. to testify on behalf of Denver is not called a sanctuary city. It is called we call ourselves, or the city council, it's a welcoming city. Well, yeah, you welcome people. And I should say I've been very pleased, and I have congratulated the mayor. I've congratulated Denver Public Schools. I'm connected in one way or another with Denver Public Schools. I am pleased that of the three major cities in the U.S. that the immigrants were, I'll say, shipped, because that bused to last year, New York City, Chicago, and Denver. I know it was difficult for everybody, but that Denver was one of those cities, because for one thing, Denver Public Schools is fairly well equipped, and they went out of their way. They did a great job in beginning to teach the students that entered their schools, approximately 3,500 to 4,000 students over the last couple of years. And the city council and the mayor, quite possibly some of you were involved in providing assistance to to the undocumented people who came here, the immigrants who came here. So Denver and Denver Public Schools should really be commended for doing that, I think. And then the second part of my response as to protections and so on, the reason I showed the First Amendment, and I'm pointing over here where I have it, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That is a separation of church and state amendment. The state should not enter churches. It goes without saying, right? Should not violate the sanctuary of churches, because for one thing, that is the separation of church and state amendment. The First Amendment, the first item that is mentioned in the First Amendment. And it continues, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, prohibiting the free exercise of one's religion. And therefore, to provide sanctuary, for example, to people who ask for sanctuary in churches and synagogues and other religious establishments. So there is some protection for young people. There's protection in DPS as much as possible. The superintendent, supported by the Board of Trustees, has issued declarations about protecting the students. And as Gregor indicated, you know, warrants should be very specific, not just flashing something like this. Warrants should be very specific. And it's hard for me to imagine that warrants would have the names of children on them, you know, to go after. But who knows what is going to happen.
Beth, are you here? Can I ask one more question? I know that we're running out of time. Beth, are there any other questions in the chat? I lost my chat when I got kicked off. You're on mute.
Janice pointed out that libraries were also considered a sanctuary,
Okay.
and otherwise just a lot of compliments about an excellent program.
Okay. I hope you don't mind if I ask one more question. There are a lot of children who have been adopted and brought to the United States and obtained naturalized citizenship. But they are also afraid. They're legal, they have passports, they're you know, they have naturalization certificates, but they're afraid of the risk of profiling. They might look Asian, they might look Hispanic. Does anybody know what happens if a legal person is sort of rounded up as one of these peripheral people? Is it enough to just show their passport? Is it or do they risk something else? Do you know anything about that? Would ICE just accept a passport and release them? Because we've seen in Newark that they said they detained legal citizens. And I know this might be a little bit out of your bailiwick, but I know of a student who's at MSU and is afraid to go to school.
I would say that touches on the birthright citizenship issue that this administration has actually turned into an issue. The statement is very clear in the 14th Amendment. Anyone born here in the US or naturalized, that's the term. That's what it says in the 14th Amendment. Or naturalized as a citizen receives the full protection, equal protection and due process. You know, I have to say though, it's the issues that these people keep coming up with. By these people, I mean the Trump administration and his supporters are unnerving. I would have never thought the birthright citizenship law in the amendment would have been questioned. It has been questioned in the past, I should say. I read through some of the earlier issues going all the way back to the 1870s, 1880s, and 1900 and so on. And every time the U.S. Supreme Court voted in favor of, you know, the birthright citizenship, and I would think that would be the case now, that would continue. And you know, there's a range of I think individuals that ICE will target, so to speak. It's hard for me to imagine somebody who was adopted to be ever in that case. So I think that they're very, very safe.
Thank you.
Gregor, do you know?
Yeah,
any-
the final thing to kind of to the question of what can folks do when they know somebody or themselves are facing detention or are in detention. There's great community organizations. The very first one to highlight is called the Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network. I'll put their website in the chat here, and they are a nonprofit. They send attorneys and legal specialists to the detention facility in Aurora, the GEO facility, and they specifically help folks to get legal representation. Of course, folks who are in detention are actually at a significant disadvantage compared to folks who are in the criminal justice system and who are in jails or in prisons. There's a right for representation, as many of you know, that does not exist for folks in immigration detention. So organizations like Remain have to go out there and provide that legal assistance, and they do fantastic work doing that. So if you all want to, you know, in addition to maybe keeping red cards, doing bystander trainings, you know, that will be very effective for you all. Should you be in a situation where you feel you can educate or assist others who are facing detention, who are being arrested, those trainings are fantastic. If you need a suggestion for future trainings, you know, there's great organizations who will do that. But Rocky Mountain Immigrant Advocacy Network, Remain is what everybody calls it. And again, I've put the website here. They do the work to assist folks who are in detention and who can assist getting people out. And I just see the note here from Linda, the stop work order. That's interesting. Thank you, Linda, for that update. I did not know that. And we will probably continue to see limitations of these groups and ways to cut these organizations down, given their work.
I should add, and I know we're running out of time, but some of the organizations and nonprofits that Mr. Mader just mentioned, they are the explanation. They are the reason that when all of the immigrants came within the last few years, because they had to. I looked into this. We've discussed it quite a bit. When they came here, that is why Denver was prepared to begin to assist these individuals. And the same is true for Denver Public Schools. When those students came here, Denver Public Schools had excellent background for assisting them. It was very, very difficult. I've worked with people in DPS for the last year and a half or so, 2 years. That's why they were prepared, because they had developed, they had organized, they had studied and so on. And then when they were willing to, or rather when they were ready to accept all of these students, which was immediate, of course, they were able to assist. By the way, I noticed that Beth Hendricks indicated when I was talking earlier about naturalization, the First Lady is a naturalized citizen, right? Donald Trump's wife, Melania Trump, and his first wife was also a naturalized citizen. I'm almost positive I'm correct there. Elon Musk is a naturalized citizen. A lot of the Fortune 500 CEOs and so on are naturalized citizens. So yeah, that's a fairly standard rule and policy that we have. Okay.
We've got one last question.
All right. Yes.
I have a question in terms of, I think, I just need something clarified in my head. What's in my head when they say there's gonna be an ice raid is I have visions of maybe a group of people in a classroom or a group of people hanging out, I don't know, at a bar or a mall or wherever. And ICE just comes in and anybody that they feel like and that they think looks different, they just collect and take somewhere. Is that what an ICE raid is?
Gregor, you want to start with it?
Yeah, absolutely. Probable cause is something that ICE agents will use to detain folks, right? And remember, detention technically it's not an arrest. I'm not an attorney, right? This is not legal advice. But detention is technically not an arrest. Arrest comes, through the criminal system, and immigration law and criminal law are technically two separate bodies of law. But a detention really just says we're going to keep you. And it allows folks to keep somebody based on something like probable cause, which frankly could be where somebody is, could be if somebody is fleeing ICE from ICE agents. It could be because the ICE agents were like, well, given the circumstance, I mean, law enforcement does this all the time. I used to be a legal investigator, so I've spent time in courts and I've seen law enforcement testify. This was many years ago. And this is how, law enforcement presents their reason to detain or somebody, arrest somebody, right? They can say, well, given my training and expertise, those are sort of the magic words, my training and expertise, I had probable cause to suspect that, right? So yes, I've not been part of a raid, but generally, yeah, folks, like there'll be a large number of officers will show up with armed and with handcuffs and vans, and they'll go to places. Oftentimes it's I mentioned meatpacking plants, right? Because that certainly happened in Colorado. It could be really any place where they say, oh, training and experience has shown us this is where undocumented folks are. And then, yes, absolutely, folks.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
so if you happen to be there, you can get rounded up with everybody else.
Yes, definitely. And I would remind us of when there were previous raids and previous deportation proceedings against families 4 or
Mhm.
5 years ago. And all we have to do is remember the children in cages, and that is a literal statement. Children in cages separated from their families.
Right.
When that happens to children, what else can happen to adults? And I've been saying regarding the Denver DACA and the Colorado DACA, if we cannot defend and protect children, who can we defend and protect? And Donald Trump, for example, has said, and he said this a couple of times, there was no accident. He has said, at first it sounds positive, but wait until you hear the end. He has said, I want to keep families together.
Right.
So if there are US born children and we're going to deport the adults, the children, of course, will have to go along with the adults so we can keep the families together. So that sounds, again, it
Right.
sounds on the surface positive.
It's
but
just a
when
way.
when we are deporting children who should be protected by the 14th Amendment, they should be protected because they are children. But when they should be protected by the 14th Amendment and other amendments, other laws, it is very possible for us to consider that there will be these mass raids and people who just happen to be there.
Well, and who are black and brown?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's very, as far as keeping families together and deporting their children who have birthright citizenship, it's the same thing that we did to the Japanese Americans during World War II. And we've apologized for that.
Yeah.
we've admitted that it was wrong, and yet we're still gonna do it again.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, all right.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a really good presentation. And I appreciate all your help with us because, we're just getting into this area and most of us have no connection with any kind of immigration agency or helping undocumented or documented immigrants. So we really appreciate your efforts. Thanks for all you do. And thanks for being here tonight. Thank you. It was really excellent.
And please consider the
pleasure.
League of Women Voters to be an ally.
Yes, very good. Thank you. And I will send the information that we were talking about
Yeah,
earlier.
for sure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate being
Thank you all.
asked and for this opportunity. Okay, good night.
Thank you.
For the invite. Have a good night.
Bye. Beth, is Chris still on?